had a 44 Magnum and another small pistol, like a 25 or whatever, and they here's vintage Bob Lazar. Out of the EG&G building, they were going to issue him a gun, and it was just a little 32 or whatever, and the lady told Bob that he had to sign for it, and that if it came up missing, he was going to owe them $500. And Bob argues with them and said it doesn't even cost that much. Why would I give you $500 if I lost a gun that only cost $250? And he said, why can't I use my own gun? And she said, well, we didn't know you had any. And that's because he lived in New Mexico and you didn't have to register guns back then. And they took him to the police substation. But it's funny that here Bob Lazar is in the most secret program anyone could ever imagine. The Russians are chasing people around. They go to issue him a gun, and he argues about the deposit on it. And but anyway, so Dennis Mariani took him down to the police substation and registered his guns, so he would have legally registered guns to protect himself. And of course, since then, I think the head guy at that substation was Lieutenant. And of course, George, we have a mutual acquaintance, TJ, who I've tried to get people to go down, and that would be important to get those records. Who did Dennis Mariani talk to that they could just walk in there in the evening at nighttime and register a gun at a police substation like that? But people who tried to get into there were told to mind their own business, and nothing that I'm aware of ever came to fruition from those records.
Of course, the lack of records is the main reason that a lot of people don't believe the story. Stan Friedman comes to mind. The fact that Bob can't prove that he went to school at the places where he claims he got earned degrees. We're going to get into that as soon as we come back from this break. I'm George Knapp. Stay with us for more of Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast to Coast. My guests, Gene Huff and John Lear, talking about the origins of the Area 51 story and Bob Lazar. I remember 20 years ago tonight, you guys were out in the desert. You saw one of these discs being test flown, and Bob was the guy who told you about it. And then a month or so, 2 months after that, sometime in May, Bob went on the air at KLAS TV, blacked out his face. He used the pseudonym Dennis, which was sort of a twisted little shot at his boss, Dennis Mariani, the guy who was in charge of him out there. And life was never the same. He told the basic story in a 4 or 5 minute interview. We started working on a much larger special after that, and things were very different. But I remember in the very first story we ever aired in November of that year, where we revealed Bob's true name and identity, we mentioned that his claims of educational credentials, MIT and Caltech, that we could not verify that. And, subsequently, a lot of people have come forward to say, aha, there's no records that he ever went to those shows. Stan Friedman comes to mind. I give Stan a lot of credit for actually doing the legwork himself and checking it out. But the fact is that we reported that in the very first story where Bob Lazar's name was ever used. It is troubling to me, and I'm sure to you guys, that he can't prove that he went to those schools. I know we all must harbor some doubts about whether he ever did go to those schools, why he would lie about it. I personally have great doubts about it for a simple reason. Not because there are no records, but because I can't imagine Bob sitting through other kinds of classes that it would be required to get a degree at any school, English Lit or something like that. I can see him sitting through science classes, electronics classes, but not the other kinds of things he'd have to sit through. Gene, why don't you start it there? You've answered this stuff before. Is it possible that Bob just exaggerated his credentials in order to get a great job?
Well, I don't know that he needed those credentials to get the job. And, I mean, he got the job, at least the one job we know of down at Los Alamos through Kirk Meyer, which is a headhunter that provides people, for technical and scientific positions at Los Alamos and other national labs. So are they all so stupid that Bob told them, oh, yeah, I've got a couple of master's degrees? And they said, oh, okay, well, here, we'll hire you as a senior staff physicist, and you go do this job. Certainly, he had clearance. I mean, there's evidence that he had security clearance. So the people that did his security clearance are so stupid. You know what I mean? I don't know that he needed those degrees to get those jobs. If anything, I think he exaggerated it after the fact for ego reasons or whatever. I mean, if he did, it's unfortunate because I truly believe that he worked on flying discs at S4 And if people are dismissing the story because of his lack of educational credentials, then it was a tragic, tragic mistake. But no one said you needed 2 master's degrees to have any of the jobs he's held at Los Alamos or at S4.
But wouldn't you say, I mean, the argument being, and John, maybe you can tackle this, gosh, you'd have to have degrees. You'd have to be a really smart guy, and they'd only pick the best scientists. Well, I guess we covered this partly before, but it's got to bother you as well. You know Bob real well. Do you harbor questions about whether he really went to those schools or not?
No, I don't, because when he came over with Gene, he had a resume with him, and there was copies both of his degree from MIT and Caltech. And I asked him when he went there, because this guy, Tom Hood, did a timeline, and Bob said that Los Alamos had sent him there. Now, I have no doubt about that, but I don't know how the timeline works. I don't know how he could have fitted in.
Well, I'm not saying he didn't go to those schools, but the question is, did he graduate with a master's degree, and what courses could have transferred from one program to another? I mean, that's a complex scenario. I mean, if you have 2 master's degrees, it doesn't mean you went from your freshman through 6 years of college for each one, taking all those classes individually. So it's a complex paradigm to say that he's got the 2 master's degrees. But I've discussed this with a lot of people, and the one thing that who've been around Bob, and John, you know this, he is a comprehensive problem solver. I mean, not only does he understand physics, he understands electronics, he understands a lot of things. He's a jack of all trades and master of quite a number. It's not, not master of none. He's a master in electronics. I mean, he's fixed audiophile stereo equipment for me and said, look, I did this for you, but don't tell anybody I can do this because I don't want to be fixing everybody's stereo equipment. And so, we tried to, I and others have tried to resolve who were they looking for that program at S4. I mean, there's nothing really, they were learning science and from physics that didn't really exist with materials that didn't even exist, commonly on Earth. And so is there any background or other job that would have prepared you for back engineering just from another planet? And what degree and what importance did they place on what? In other words, your background, your educational credentials, how about whether you could take it? I mean, a lot of people, a devoutly religious person wouldn't want to hear some of the things Bob read in those reports. Again, who could they trust? Who would help them? Who could they trust, or who could they discredit if they couldn't trust them? I think the criteria was a lot more than, you've got these. Look, if they just wanted people with master's degrees, they could have had any number of PhDs in the entire world would have given their right arm to be in that program. So that simply couldn't be the criteria.
Well, for me, the linchpin of his credibility was always Los Alamos. If he worked at Los Alamos lab and sensitive or classified capabilities, that it was entirely plausible that he could be pulled into a program at Area 51 or S4. And I don't think there's any question. In fact, there's no question in my mind that he really was at Los Alamos. Right. I remember the time that he took us there on a weekend, and we went in. And he waved
videotape of that tour, and he went any place he wanted, right?
Yeah, he waved at the guard. He took us in. It was like a rabbit going through its own burrow, zipping through these buildings and stuff. He knew his way around, waved at people. We brought a video camera in, as you mentioned, John, and nobody stopped us. We took video of that, and it was pretty clear he knew his way around the place. He was in the phone book, but still, that's not enough. I mean, people, well, that doesn't prove he worked at S4. If he was at S4, it doesn't prove he worked on saucers. It's part of the reason why Bob doesn't really like to talk about this stuff anymore, because there's always going to be another round of questions.
Is this not true of anyone? If someone worked on a terrestrial program, I mean, are they allowed to take home evidence? And if they worked there, did they work on that craft? Does that craft exist? I mean, forget Bob Lazar. Can some man who's working out in central Nevada on whatever our newest spy plane is right now, is he allowed to prove that he's working on that? And how does he do that?
Let's talk about element 115. This is the magical element that Bob said was used to power these flying saucers. John, give me your take on 115. I know